Adam Johnson, Sunderland. The downfall of Adam Johnson is the ultimate pretender failure, a high-flying England international whose career ended in a prison cell. In 2016, Johnson was convicted of sexual activity with a 15-year-old girl. The darkness of this story isn't just the crime itself, but the institutional failure of Sunderland AFC. The club knew about the police investigation and continued to play him for nearly a year, prioritizing their relegation battle over moral accountability. They only sacked him when he pleaded guilty in court. This exposed a desperate, winning-at-all-costs mentality that ignored the safety of the community. Johnson went from a $15 million winger to an inmate, and the club's reputation was permanently scarred. This is a story Sky Sports rarely revisits because it forces the league to look at how it protects, and fails to protect, vulnerable people when a star player is involved. It was a total breakdown of ethical standards, proving that for some clubs, the points on the board matter more than the laws of the land. The tragedy of Emiliano Sala, Cardiff City. This is the darkest signing story in the history of the Premier League, a moment where the business of football turned into a literal graveyard. In January 2019, Cardiff City broke their transfer record for Argentinian striker Emiliano Sala. He was the hope of a struggling club. But the plane carrying him from Nantes to Cardiff disappeared over the English Channel. The failure here was systemic and institutional. An unlicensed pilot, an aging aircraft, and a total lack of oversight from the agents involved. Sala's final WhatsApp message, where he expressed fear that the plane was falling apart, is a chilling testament to the disregard for his safety. The aftermath was even grimmer, a bitter, years-long legal battle over the transfer fee between Cardiff and Nantes while a family grieved. It exposed the wild west of football agency, where profit was prioritized over the basic welfare of a human being. Cardiff's failure wasn't just on the pitch. It was the failure to ensure their most expensive asset was treated with basic dignity. Sala never kicked a ball in the Premier League, but his name is forever etched into its history as a warning about the greed that lurks beneath the surface. It was a tragedy that shouldn't have happened, a result of corners being cut at every level of the logistical process. Benjamin Mendy and Mason Greenwood, Man City and Man United. The most recent and high-profile entries into the league's dark ledger. Both players face serious legal battles. Mendy for multiple counts of rape, later found not guilty or acquitted, and Greenwood for attempted rape and assault, charges later dropped. Regardless of the legal outcomes, the stories are too dark because of the audio and visual evidence that leaked into the public domain, revealing a side of modern player culture that is predatory and entitled. The failure here was the institutional panic, Manchester United's botched attempt to reintegrate Greenwood and Manchester City's quiet distancing from Mendy. These cases forced the league to confront the reality of how young, hyper-wealthy athletes operate behind closed doors. They are stories of shattered reputations and a total disconnect from the family-friendly brand the Premier League tries to project. They serve as a grim reminder that behind the Nike ads and the glossy highlights, there is a world of power dynamics and moral ambiguity that the broadcasters simply cannot touch. The Munich Air Disaster, Manchester United. The foundation of the Manchester United dynasty is a grave in Germany. In 1958, the Busby Babes, a generation of generational talent, were wiped out in a plane crash. This is the darkest chapter in the history of any global club. The failure was a combination of weather, pilot error, and the pressure of a relentless European schedule. The tragedy didn't just kill players. It nearly killed the club itself. The subsequent rise to win the European Cup 10 years later is the glossy version, but the dark reality is the survivors' guilt, the shattered families, and the literal extinction of a team's DNA. United's identity is built on this tragedy. They are a club that exists in the shadow of those who died. This institutional trauma is the reason the club is so fiercely protective of its history, but it's also a heavy burden that has crushed many managers who couldn't live up to the Busby ghost. The Hillsborough Cover-up, Liverpool. Hillsborough is the original sin of English football. 97 fans went to a game and never came home. But the darkness of the story is the 30-year institutional lie that followed. The police, the government, and the Sun newspaper conspired to blame the fans for the disaster, labeling them as drunken hooligans who picked the pockets of the dead. This wasn't a sporting failure. It was a state-level conspiracy. The failure of the FA to ensure a safe stadium and the subsequent failure of the justice system to hold anyone accountable for decades is a stain on the league's history that no amount of modern PR can wash away. It defined Liverpool FC's modern identity, a club built on grief, resilience, and a total distrust of the establishment. This story is too dark because it reveals that the league's fans were once viewed as disposable livestock by those in power. Every time you see a Justice for the 97 banner, you are looking at a 3-decade war against a system that tried to bury the truth. Paul Gascoigne's long decline. Gaza was the most talented English player of his generation, a level 7 talent who suffered a level 1 collapse. His career was a slow-motion car crash of alcoholism, domestic abuse, and mental health crises. The failure was the league's inability to protect its most valuable and vulnerable asset. Gascoigne was treated as a clown, a character for the media to feast on, while he was clearly disintegrating. From the domestic violence allegations involving his ex-wife Cheryl to his bizarre appearance at the Raoul Moat standoff with a fishing rod and a cooked chicken, his story is a tragedy of wasted genius. The Premier League era used his fame to build its brand but offered little in the way of structural support for a man with an addictive personality. He is a living reminder that the glamour of the 90s era was fueled by a toxic culture of drinking and self-destruction that ruined lives long after the final whistle blew. The murder of Wimbledon FC, MK Dons. The story of the crazy gang ending with the club being stolen and moved to a different city, Milton Keynes, is the most cynical institutional failure in the history of the league. The FA allowed a franchise to be uprooted, ignoring the fans and the history of the community. It was a level 1 betrayal that proved the game was no longer about local identity. It was about real estate and marketing. The darkness of this story is the total erasure of a club's soul for the sake of a new stadium and a better demographic. While AFC Wimbledon rose from the ashes, the original Wimbledon FC was essentially murdered by a boardroom. This is a story of corporate coldness that Sky rarely explores because it highlights the vulnerability of every club to the greed of its owners. It's the pretender version of a football club, a fake entity built on the bones of a real one. Marc-Vivien Foé, Manchester City. In 2003, during a Confederations Cup match, Man City midfielder Marc-Vivien Foé collapsed in the center circle and died. The world watched as medics tried to revive him for 45 minutes. The failure was the total disregard for player welfare in the face of a bloated international schedule. Foé was exhausted, playing in heat that was dangerous, for a tournament that many felt shouldn't have existed. His death on the pitch is a visual that Sky Sports almost never replays because it is too visceral, too real. It stripped away the superhuman aura of the Premier League athlete and showed a young man dying for a game. It led to better heart screening, but the cost was a life lost in the pursuit of content. Super League betrayal. In April 2021, the Big Six attempted to kill the Premier League in the middle of the night. They signed up for a closed-shop European Super League, a total institutional failure of loyalty to the fans and the pyramid. This was the level 7 of corporate greed, the owners of United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, and the rest deciding that the fans were no longer necessary. The darkness of this story is the sheer arrogance of the ownership, who viewed the English game as a legacy product to be discarded. The subsequent fan protests saved the game, but the trust was permanently broken. It revealed that the people running the biggest franchises in the world have zero interest in the sport. They only care about the equity. This is a story of a failed coup that Sky glosses over because they are the ones who pay the billions that fuel this greed. The Leicester City helicopter crash, October 2018. The miracle of Leicester ended in the most horrific way imaginable in the King Power Stadium parking lot. Minutes after a match against West Ham, the helicopter carrying owner Vikhai Srivaddhanaprabha and 4 others spun out of control and burst into flames. The world watched in real time as the heart of a club was incinerated. The failure here was a technical catastrophe, a failed tail rotor mechanism, but the emotional fallout was an institutional trauma that the club has never truly moved past. Srivaddhanaprabha wasn't just an owner, he was the architect of the greatest underdog story in sports. The sight of his players standing in the scorched remains of the parking lot the next day is an image too dark for the celebratory montages Sky usually produces. It reminded everyone that the Premier League is a world built on high-risk, high-reward machinery, and when that machinery fails, it leaves behind a void that money cannot fill. The club's subsequent struggle to maintain their elite status is a quiet echo of that night. They lost their North Star, and the institutional instability that followed was a direct result of that traumatic decapitation of leadership. Joey Barton's violent record, Man City, Newcastle, and QPR. Joey Barton is the Premier League's definitive anti-hero who crossed the line into pure villainy multiple times. His record is a laundry list of violence, stubbing a lit cigarette into a teammate's eye, a 6-month prison sentence for a brutal assault in Liverpool's city centre, and an on-pitch meltdown at QPR where he tried to fight half the Manchester City team. The failure here was a systemic one. Multiple clubs continued to give him one last chance because of his talent, effectively enabling his destructive behavior. Barton's story is too dark for the beautiful game narrative because it highlights the league's willingness to tolerate toxicity if it brings a competitive edge. He wasn't just a hard man. He was a liability whose presence often poisoned the culture of the dressing room. His eventual move into management, followed by further controversies and legal battles, shows a man who never truly escaped the violent impulses that defined his playing days. He is a reminder that the Premier League can be a refuge for the unhinged, as long as they can tackle and pass. The Bradford City Fire, May 1985. While it occurred just before the Premier League era, the Bradford Fire is a foundational trauma for the clubs that would later form the league. In less than 4 minutes, a wooden stand was engulfed in flames, killing 56 people. The failure was a mix of gross negligence and institutional complacency. The stand was a known fire trap, filled with years of accumulated rubbish beneath the floorboards. The harrowing footage of fans on fire, trying to climb onto the pitch while others continued to celebrate a trophy win on the other side of the stadium, is the most disturbing video in the history of English football. It is the ultimate warning of what happens when infrastructure is ignored. The pre-Premier League era was defined by this kind of decay, and the shiny, modern stadiums we see today are built on the ashes of these failures. It is a story of total structural abdication that Sky almost never shows in full because the images are genuinely nightmarish. Dele Alli's trauma and addiction. For years, Dele Alli was criticized as a lazy player who had lost his way. The truth, revealed in a heartbreaking interview with Gary Neville, was far darker: childhood sexual abuse, drug dealing at age 8, and a debilitating addiction to sleeping pills and laughing gas during his Premier League career. The failure here was the public and media's rush to judgment, treating a traumatized young man like a failing asset. Dele's story is too dark for the usual football analysis because it touches on systemic child neglect and the failure of the academy system to act as a safe haven. He was a superstar at Tottenham, but he was drowning in a sea of unprocessed trauma. His story is a rare look at the human cost of the academy to pro pipeline, where boys from horrific backgrounds are expected to perform like machines without any psychological repair. It's a story of a pretender who was actually a victim of a system that only valued him when he was scoring goals. The liquidation of Bury FC. In 2019, a 134-year-old club was simply deleted. Bury FC was expelled from the Football League due to financial mismanagement by owners who treated the club like a disposable asset. The failure was the fit and proper persons test, a total institutional abdication by the FA and the EFL. They allowed owners to strip the club of its assets and leave the fans with nothing. The sight of fans crying outside the empty Gig Lane Stadium is a dark reminder that the Premier League's wealth doesn't trickle down. It concentrates at the top while the foundations of the game are left to rot. Bury's death was an execution by neglect, a warning that without regulation, any club is vulnerable to the whims of a bad faith actor. It's a story of community loss that the Big Six clubs, with their Super League ambitions, seem all too willing to replicate. Fabrice Muamba's 78 minutes. Fabrice Muamba's heart stopped for 78 minutes during a match at White Hart Lane. He was dead on the pitch. While his survival is a miracle, the story is dark because of the sheer trauma it inflicted on everyone present. Players were in tears, the game was abandoned, and the images of Muamba lying motionless are haunting. The failure here was the lack of immediate cardiac response units at every ground, something that was only mandated after he nearly died. His career ended that day at the age of 23. Muamba's story is a reminder of the level 2 fragility of the human body, even when it's at peak fitness. We treat these players like avatars in a video game, but Muamba's collapse proved that they are one heartbeat away from becoming a statistic. Sportswashing and the 115 charges. Manchester City and Newcastle United represent the modern giant failure, success built on the back of state-owned wealth and a total disregard for financial fair play. City's 115 charges for financial irregularities are the ultimate dark cloud over the league's competitive integrity. If the charges are true, the last decade of Premier League history is a fraud. This is a story of engineered dominance, where the failure is the league's inability to enforce its own rules against the sovereign state. It's too dark for TV because it suggests that the sport is actually just a geopolitical tool used to distract from human rights abuses. Every trophy City wins is shadowed by a legal ledger that could eventually see them stripped of their titles, a level of institutional chaos that the league is terrified to confront. The Gary Speed mystery: Sheffield United, Everton, Newcastle, and Leeds. Gary Speed was the ultimate Premier League professional, a veteran of over 500 games, a respected manager, and a man who appeared on Football Focus just hours before he was found dead in his garage. His suicide in 2011 remains one of the most haunting and unexplained tragedies in the game. The failure here was the silent failure of mental health support in a hypermasculine environment. Speed was a pillar of the league, yet he was battling demons that no one saw. His death exposed the brave-face culture of the Premier League, where players are expected to be indestructible gladiators. The silence surrounding his death, the lack of a note, the shock of his colleagues, points to a darkness that the league still struggles to address. We talk about tactical systems and transfer values, but Speed's story is a reminder of the human cost of the spotlight. He was a hero to millions, yet he felt utterly alone in his struggle. His legacy is the slow opening of the conversation around mental health, But the cost of that conversation was the life of one of the league's most respected icons. The gambling epidemic, Ivan Toney and Sandro Tonali. The Premier League is currently facing a dark paradox. It is sponsored by betting companies while its players are being banned for gambling addictions. Ivan Toney and Sandro Tonali are just the tip of the iceberg. The failure is the league's institutional hypocrisy, taking hundreds of millions from gambling firms while punishing the young men who fall into the trap. Tonali's story involves black market bookies and a secret double life, a darkness that Sky avoids because it threatens the revenue stream of their sponsors. This isn't just a few bad choices, it's a systemic addiction that is rotting the integrity of the game from the inside out. Players are being groomed by friends and agents into high-stakes gambling rings, and the league's solution is to ban the players while keeping the Bet365 logos on the shirts. It's a story of corporate greed versus athlete welfare. Portsmouth's financial collapse. Portsmouth went from winning the FA Cup in 2008 to being the first Premier League club to enter administration. They were the victims of a shell game of ownership, 4 different owners in one season, none of whom had the money to run the club. The failure was the league's inability to vet the people buying their franchises. Portsmouth was used as a laundry machine for debt, and when the music stopped, the club was left in ruins, suffering back-to-back relegations. This is a story of total institutional collapse, a club that flew too high on borrowed wings and crashed into the dirt. It serves as a grim warning to every mid-table club. The Premier League dream is a high-stakes gamble that can end in the total annihilation of your institution. David Bust and Eduardo, the injuries too graphic for TV. There are injuries so bad that Sky Sports refuses to show the replay. David Bust's leg break was so horrific that Peter Schmeichel had to seek counseling after seeing the bone protrude through the skin and the blood on the pitch. Eduardo's leg break at Birmingham City was similarly censored. These are dark stories because they represent the physical destruction of a dream in a split second. Bust never played again. He underwent 22 surgeries to save his leg from amputation. These moments remind us that the Premier League is a contact sport where the stakes are life-altering. We celebrate the toughness of the league, but these injuries are the reality of that toughness: shattered bones, ended careers, and a lifetime of pain for the sake of a Saturday afternoon's entertainment. The dark side of academy life. For every Marcus Rashford, there are 10,000 boys who are discarded by the Premier League academy system every year. The failure is the 99% failure rate, a system that takes boys at age 8, tells them they are the next big thing, and then dumps them at 18 with no education and no mental health support. The darkness of this story is the silent graveyard of failed prospects, stories of depression, suicide, and drug addiction among young men who feel their lives ended before they began. This is the pre-tourist tier of the league, a factory of broken dreams that fuels the top-tier success. Sky shows the debut goal montages, but they never show the boy who was released on his 18th birthday and ended his life 6 months later. It is the most systemic and hidden failure of the entire Premier League structure. And there you have it, the definitive list of stories the Premier League would rather you forgot. From the tragedies of Sala and Speed to the corporate greed of the Super League, the darkness is always there, lurking just outside the camera's frame. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, leave a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe cause I'll be posting frequently here. If you found this deep dive insightful, you need to check out my previous video on every Premier League fanbase explained, where I break down the cultural DNA that allows these fans to survive such dark histories.